This is lesson 29, part 1, and we'll be covering note names in the treble clef. If you recall way back to lesson 0 of this course, I talked about two fundamental aspects of music reading. We have beat or pulse and rhythm, and then we also have pitch. We have covered most of the fundamentals of rhythm reading at this point. Hopefully at this point you understand what a beat or a pulse is, and you're able to maintain a steady beat or pulse in your body. Hopefully you now understand note values and rest values and time signatures. Hopefully you are now able to read some basic rhythms while maintaining a steady pulse in your body. And hopefully you have at least a surface understanding of some of the more complex topics we got into in rhythm reading, like dotted notes and ties and subdivisions of the pulse and simple and compound time. Remember that if you desire to develop genuine skill and ease in learning to read music, you'll want to establish a regular practice routine. I always recommend 6 out of 7 days if possible. Ideally, it would be near the same time of day so that you just establish it as a non-negotiable habit. And particularly in the early stages of trying to develop a practice habit, I always recommend aiming low for duration and high for frequency. It's much better to practice for 5 minutes a day, 6 out of 7 days, than it is to practice for 1 hour once per week. So we are now ready to move on to the pitch portion of J. Albrecht's Ready to Read Music. I would encourage anybody who's come this far in the course to continue to spend a good chunk of your daily practice time just reading rhythms. I also want to encourage you to move at your own pace, spend plenty of time reviewing past videos if they're helpful to you. For the time being, we are going to continue to try to isolate the difficulties of reading music by continuing to read rhythm separately from pitch. This is just a helpful practice strategy in general when we're talking about music practice, to identify and then isolate all of the difficulties and practice them separately for a time before we try to put everything together. So we're going to be working at gaining facility and ease in both areas of music reading. And then towards the end of the course, I hope to provide you with some strategies that you can use to put all those pieces together so that you can eventually read rhythm and pitch at the same time. In musical terms, pitch refers to how high or low we perceive a tone to be. There are two basic types of sound waves: random waves and uniform waves. We perceive random waves as indefinite pitches, so essentially noise. Uniform waves are perceived as definite pitches, or in other words, musical tones. In Western music, we refer to uniform waves or pitches or musical tones by letter names. So the musical alphabet consists of just 7 letter names: A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And after G, we just repeat that again. We go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. The composer represents these pitches on the staff by placing note heads on or above and below the staff. So a note head on line 3 will have a different pitch or letter name than a note head on space 1. We learned that music is written on a staff that consists of 5 lines and 4 spaces that we count from the bottom to the top. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines and 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. We also learned about the treble, or G clef, which is used for the right hand of the piano, female voices, and for higher instruments. The treble, or G clef, begins on line 2. We bump up to the right to line 3, then down to line 1, up and around, loop straight down, and then a little hook. and it's called the treble or G clef because of all this curlicue action around line 2. It helps us to know that line 2 is very important. If we draw a note head right there, we can know that this pitch will be a G, and from there we'll be able to decode all of the other pitches on and above and below this staff. We also learned about the bass or F clef. The bass or F clef is used for the left hand of the piano, for male voices, and for lower instruments. And we learned that the bass clef or F clef starts on line 4. We bump up to line 5 and draw what looks a little bit like half a heart, stopping just under line 2. We draw a dot in space 4 and another dot in space 3. It's called the F clef because these points here all help us to know that line 4 is an important spot and that if we put a note head there, it will be an F. From there, we'll be able to decode what all of the other letter names will be on and above and below the staff. We are returning to Jay Albrecht's Ready to Read Music, and we are now on Unit 3, which is the pitch unit, Lesson 1, Note Names in the Treble Clef. We'll begin just by reading the lesson together. Here are all the letter names of the lines and spaces in the treble clef. The spaces from bottom to top are F, A, C, E. So F, A, C, E. Some people remember this because it spells the word face. The lines from bottom to top are E, G, B, D, F. So E, G, B, D, F. Some people remember these because it is the first letter from each word in the sentence, every good boy does fine. In Unit 1, we learned that notes, or I'll say note values, tell us how long to sing or play a musical sound. Notes also tell us how high or how low to sing or play a musical sound. Notes which are higher in the staff sound higher than notes which are lower in the staff. These little tricks of face and every good boy does fine is somewhat helpful to quickly learn the letter names and pitches on the treble staff. I actually think a better way of going about this is to really understand how we derive them, so that even if you forget these sayings or these little tricks, you're still able to decode any letter names on the treble clef staff. So recall that we call this the treble or G clef because of the curlicue action around line 2 that helps us to identify the note that is on line 2 on the treble staff as a G. Recall also that I just shared that the musical alphabet consists of 7 letter names, and once we get to the last one, we just repeat again. One note higher than G, or one letter name higher than G, will be heading up the staff. So remember, this is line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're heading up closer to line 5, heading up from line 1 to space 2. And this will be our very next letter name. So this will be our A. We would say that these notes are one step apart because the letter names are consecutive and because we go from a line note to the closest space note. Our next highest note would be our next line note, which would be labeled as a B. The distance between the A and the B here would also be considered a step because you're going from a space note to the very next line note. One letter name higher than B would be C. Notice that we can also go lower in pitch. So when we head down the staff, closer to line 1 or even below line 1, our pitches are then getting lower. So we go backwards through the musical alphabet. We go from G to the next consecutive letter name down, which would be an F. The distance between this line note and this space note would also be considered a step. From this F, I can then step 1 letter name down to E by going from this space note to the very next line note. So Mr. Albrecht says that this note would sound higher than this note, and that is because this note is on space 4, which is higher up the staff, than this note, which is on line 2, which is lower down the staff. While we're here, let's right away get some practice actually naming these pitches. I'm going to start with this one because you'll notice this is our curly Q, highlighting line 2, and this note happens to be right on line 2, so we can know this is a G. In order to figure out this letter name here, I'm just going to go ahead and draw a tiny little G to identify that as my G. Just remind myself. And now I'm just going to go up by letter names. So G, my next space would be A, then B, then C, then D, and then E. So this letter name is an E. Draw a note in the box which is lower than the printed note. So first let's just figure out what this letter name would actually be. A note that would be on line 2 would be a G. A would be our next space. B would be the next line. C, D, E, F. So this will be an F. And since we were just talking about stepwise motion, I'm going to draw a note that is just one step lower. So remember that when we're thinking of going lower in pitch, we think of going backwards through our musical alphabet. So if I'm on F, I'm going to need to go a step lower to E. Since this F is a line note, in order to draw a step lower, I'm just going to draw a note head in the very next space. And I can check to make sure that I have drawn one step lower by figuring out what this pitch would be that I actually drew. So again, starting on line 2, this is a G, A, B, C, D, E. Looking at the next example, again, he's actually just given us a G, a note right on line 2, so we know this is a G. Remember that he wanted me to draw a note in the box which is lower than the printed note. So instead of drawing a step lower this time, I'm actually going to draw a skip lower. So a step below would be right here, but I'm not going to draw that. I'm going to draw a skip below. So just going from a line to a line would accomplish that. So if this is a G, remember that we're going lower now. We're going to have to go backwards through our musical alphabet. So G, this space 1 would be F, and now line 1 would be an E. So I began on G, skipped over F, and ended on E. After the printed note, draw 3 different notes which are higher than the printed note. First of all, let's just name this pitch. So again, our curly Q action reminds us that a note on line 2 would be a G. So if this is a G, we know this note is an A. Notice that's just one step higher because it's the very next space above this line note that's a G. So this is an A. And note that he tells us to write 3 different notes which are higher than the printed note. If I were to put a note head right in that same space, in space 2, obviously it would also be that same A pitch, right? So he's asking me for different letter names. So I know that minimally I need to begin my next higher pitch on line 3 or higher than that. So I'm going to draw one step higher right here. My stem will go down, and this will be a B. And now, instead of doing the next step up, I'm actually going to skip. So I'm going to skip to the next line instead of drawing a note right in the next space. So if this is a G, and this is an A, and this is a B, then this over here would be a C. And so the note I just drew would be a D. For my next note, I'm going to step up again. So I'm just going to go to the very next space, and since this note here was a D, I can know that this note will be an E.